At Sarah's wedding, David pointed at me, sneering, "This is the beggar we endure." Laughter filled the room, piercing me deeper than any wound. My daughter looked away, ashamed. The Langfords stood proud, believing their empire untouchable. But hidden beneath my modest suit was the truth, documents proving I controlled their $50 million company. They saw a poor old man. What I revealed later destroyed their arrogance forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat in my living room, the same living room I had known for more than 40 years, a place that had become part of my bones. The old oak floors creaked under my slippers, the smell of coffee still hung in the air, and the late afternoon light slanted through the curtains. On the mantel above the fireplace sat Mary's picture, her smile frozen in time, her eyes warm and steady. I often talked to her picture when the house grew too quiet. That afternoon, after hearing what Sarah and David planned, I found myself staring at that frame until my vision blurred. I thought about the years, all the years I had given. When Sarah was accepted into college, the tuition alone was nearly $60,000. I wrote every check. I worked overtime, sold some stocks, and gave up the thought of replacing my own car. Her education came first. I remember the day I surprised her with a brand new Honda Civic, blue with gray seats. It cost $22,000. She squealed, hugged me, and told me I was the best father in the world. I remember standing in that driveway, watching her drive off with friends, the taillights disappearing into the night. I thought, this is what love looks like. Years later, when her sister got married, I covered nearly $35,000 for the wedding. The dress, the reception, even the photographer who charged more than I thought reasonable, but I wanted her day to be perfect. Every dollar felt like an investment in family, in love, in loyalty. And yet here I was, sitting alone, hearing that the very child I had given everything to now wanted to take from me. The house around me carried every sacrifice in its walls. This house was worth $600,000 today, but to me, it was priceless. I built the shelves in the hallway myself. Mary and I laid the tiles in the kitchen, laughing when we messed up the grout. Every corner whispered our story. On the coffee table sat an old album with yellowed pages, photos of birthdays, graduations, and holidays when the family felt whole. Now Sarah, with David's influence, wanted to sell this house, not to help me, not to take care of me, but to cash out, to throw me into a nursing home and pocket the money. My savings account, nearly $500,000, was also in their sights. They had already talked to bankers, already dreamed of the vacations and cars my lifetime of work could buy them. The betrayal burned deeper than any wound. I leaned back into my old leather chair, the one Mary and I had picked up from a second-hand store 30 years ago. The leather was cracked, the arms worn smooth by countless evenings of reading and listening to the radio. That chair had carried me through grief when Mary passed. Now it carried me again as I tried to hold myself together. My eyes scanned the room. The wedding picture of Sarah smiled back from the wall. I remembered her in that white dress, tears in her eyes, promising forever. And now, forever had turned into this: schemes, greed, and whispers about how best to get rid of me. My heart ached with questions. How could she do this? How could the same little girl who clutched my hand at the fair, who begged for bedtime stories, who once believed I could fix anything, now choose to betray me for money? For a long time, I sat there broken. The betrayal pressed down on me like a heavy stone. I thought of giving up, thought of giving. Maybe it would be easier to let them take it all, to let them sign papers, move me into some quiet corner of a nursing home, and forget my name. I am 65. My body aches, my hands tremble. Maybe I should accept that my time is nearly done. That's what the voice of despair whispered in my ear. But then my eyes returned to Mary's picture. Her smile was gentle, but her gaze was strong. I whispered, almost afraid of my own voice, "Mary, they want to take everything we built. They want to erase us. I can't let that happen." And something inside me shifted. The grief gave way to a spark. I realized that surrender would mean my entire life's work would end in the pockets of people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle. I had spent decades working, saving, protecting this family, and now, when I was supposed to rest, they wanted to push me aside. No, I would not give them the satisfaction. I would not allow them to rewrite the story Mary and I had built with our sweat and our love. For the first time since hearing their plan, I felt a strange calm, a clarity. I knew I still had power. I still had choices. I stood, though my knees complained, and walked slowly to the bedroom. The air in there was cooler, heavier, as if it carried memories in every shadow. In the corner stood the old iron safe, the one few people even knew existed. The key was on a chain around my neck, hidden under my shirt. With trembling hands, I turned it, and the door opened with a groan. Inside lay documents I had not touched in years. Insurance papers, bonds, and the deed to this very house. My fingers brushed across the thick envelope, the edges rough against my skin. In that moment, the papers felt less like documents and more like weapons. Weapons I could use to fight back. I carried the envelope back to the living room. The lamp on the side table cast a golden glow, warm yet sharp, making every paper look alive. I spread them out in front of me, reading the words I had once ignored. Every line was proof that I still had control, proof that what Sarah and David wanted could not happen without my hand. My lips curled into a bitter smile. They thought I was weak, too old, too tired to resist. They thought I would roll over and sign whatever papers they slid in front of me. But they were wrong. I sat there, tapping my fingers on the papers, my mind racing. Ideas formed, sharp and fast. I could call Harris, my lawyer, first thing in the morning. I could restructure ownership, freeze accounts, and make moves that would blindside them. The very people who laughed behind my back, who whispered about nursing homes, would soon discover the truth. They had underestimated me. That was their mistake. As the clock ticked and the room grew darker, I whispered again to Mary's picture. They think I'm finished, Mary, but they don't know me. They don't know us. I will fight for what we built. I will not go quietly. My voice cracked, but the determination in it was real. The documents were stacked neatly now, the safe key heavy around my neck once more. I leaned back in the chair, breathing deeply. My chest no longer ached with helplessness. Instead, it throbbed with resolve. I thought of Sarah's face when she would realize that her father was not so easily broken. I thought of David's smug grin collapsing when he discovered the trap. The night outside was still, but inside me, the storm had found direction. I stared at the papers until the letters blurred again. Then I said aloud, slow and steady, "They think I'm weak, but the game has only begun." The sound of my own voice in that quiet house felt like a promise. Not just to myself, but to Mary and to the life we had built. Tomorrow, I will begin. Tonight, I allowed myself one final look around the room that held both my memories and my pain. This was not the end. This was the line in the sand. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke before the sun, the way I used to when Sarah was little, and I packed her lunch, the way I did in the years after Mary passed, and the house felt too big for one man. The kitchen clock clicked toward 6. The coffee maker gurgled. The window over the sink held a gray band of mourning. On the table lay the envelope I had taken from the safe, thick with deeds, policies, and statements that told the real story of my life. I ran my hand over the paper like a carpenter checking a finished board. Smooth here, rough there, strong all the way through. I dialed Harris at 6:45 because I knew he rose early. He had been my lawyer and my friend for 20 years. We buried our wives in the same season. We learned to keep busy. When he answered, his voice was clear, surprised, but awake. I told him I needed to move quickly, that I had to protect the house and the money I had saved. I said the number out loud, $300,000, and it sounded strange in my own mouth. He didn't ask for gossip. He didn't ask for names. He asked for facts, dates, and account numbers. I gave him everything. He said we would freeze the savings today, put a hold that required my in-person signature, and add a second layer of authorization at the bank. He said we would review the deed, confirm the homestead protections, and if I wanted, we could place the house into a revocable trust with me as trustee. My hands stopped shaking while he talked. It felt like a map. It felt like air. By 8:30, I was dressed in my oldest jeans and a threadbare flannel, the kind you wear when you rake leaves. I looked at myself in the hall mirror and almost laughed. The man staring back at me looked tired, yes, but not finished. I slipped the safe key back under my shirt, tucked the folder into an old leather messenger bag, and drove my Camry downtown. The engine hummed its familiar tune. The seat held the memory of my shape. People think a car is a car, but a car can be a second living room, a chapel, a confession booth. Mine was all three. The bank opened at 9. I walked in as the doors unlocked and was greeted by the same security guard who had watched me shuffle in with Mary after her chemo, the same guard who nodded softly the day I closed the account with her name on it. The branch manager, Ms. Jenkins, led me to her office with its small window and fake plant that fooled no one. We spoke in plain terms. I told her I wanted a hold on the savings account that prevented any transfer without me, in person, with identification. I told her I wanted alerts for any activity, text, and email. I asked for a temporary freeze while my lawyer prepared new documents. She printed forms, explained the paragraphs, and tapped the places to sign. The numbers on the screen meant more to me than they ever had. 300,000 isn't a fortune to some people. To me, it was a lifetime of careful notes, overtime hours, skipped vacations, and coupons cut at the kitchen table. When it was done, she looked up at me with that professional kindness bankers keep ready for bad days. "You did the right thing," she said. "You'd be surprised how often families—" Well, she didn't have to finish. I knew. I had seen it at funerals and in hospital rooms. Money makes people forget their last names. I thanked her and left. Harris texted that he could see me at 10:30. I walked the 2 blocks to his office. The autumn air had a bite to it. The courthouse across the street looked the same as it had in the 80s when I pulled building permits and worried if the inspector would pass the wiring. Inside, Harris's office smelled like coffee and old books. The chairs were solid, the kind that didn't try to impress you. He took my folder, skimmed, set aside, skimmed more. He asked quiet questions. He wrote notes in a tight hand. Then he raised his eyes and spoke like a man fixing a roof before the storm. We would file a notice with the county, he said, to place the house into a revocable living trust, with me as trustee. No one could sell it without my signature, and I could revoke the trust if I chose. We would add a transfer on death designation to pass it cleanly one day, but not today. Not to anyone who would dump me in a facility for a quick payday. He suggested a power of attorney with a successor I actually trusted, not Sarah, not David. He suggested a new will, simple, clean, without openings for others to pry into. He asked about my insurance. I pulled the policy from the folder. He smiled, a tired smile. "You've kept good records," he said. "Mary would be proud." I swallowed and could not speak for a moment. We drafted the trust. He dictated to his paralegal names, dates, parcel numbers, and legal descriptions that turned my home into measured lines and angles. I signed preliminary directives so he could file the temporary measures that same day. On my way out, he put a hand on my shoulder. "You're not alone," he said. I nodded because I could not do more. Back home, the house felt different. Not lighter, not yet, but steadier. The floorboards didn't groan as much. The kitchen tiles looked level again. I poured another cup of coffee and stood at the window. The maple in the front yard had started to turn. I remembered planting it when Sarah was 7, how she patted the dirt with her small hands and asked if the tree would remember her name. I had said yes. Trees remember. Trees. They hold what we tell them. Around noon, I heard a car door slam, then heels on the front steps. Then the old doorbell with its polite ding. I knew that rhythm. Sarah. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. She stood there in a nice coat, hair perfect, eyes tight. She looked past me into the house the way realtors do. I saw it, and it cut. She stepped inside without waiting, and then stopped, taking in my shirt, my jeans, the bag on the chair, and the old shoes. Her mouth curled, then dropped into a frown. "Dad, what are you wearing?" She said it as if my clothes were an insult. "We're meeting David tonight. Please, at least try. You know how he is about appearances." I felt the heat rise in my neck. I told her I'd be there for dinner. I said I had work around the house. I said clothes didn't make a man. She crossed her arms and shook her head. "This is exactly what I told him," she muttered. "You're going to embarrass me. Again. You never trust me. You never trust my choices." She looked at the living room like it was a museum she was tired of touring. "David is trying to help, Dad. He wants what's best. He wants real care for you. The assisted living center we toured had a memory wing, a gym, a chef. He said it's $7,000 a month, but we can manage if we sell this place. You'd be comfortable. You'd be safe." There are 100 things I could have said. I could have said that I walk 2 miles most mornings, that my mind is clear enough to recite the serial numbers on my tools, that I cook my own meals and still fix my own leaky faucets. I could have said that I don't need a chef. I could have said that selling the house to fund a plan I never agreed to is not love. But I saw the way Sarah's jaw clenched, the way her eyes darted toward the framed photos as if they were already packed in a box. And I swallowed my anger like a bitter pill. My voice came out quiet. "I'll be ready for dinner at 6. She studied me as if looking for a fight, then turned to go. Her perfume lingered after the door shut. The house shivered in the silence. I set the towel down and stood there until the clock in the hall struck 1. My hands shook and then were still. "This is the cost," I whispered to Mary to myself. "This is the cost." At 5:30, I changed into an even older shirt. The collar was frayed. The elbows had thin, shiny patches. I put on the brown jacket I wore to rake leaves. I purposely chose the shoes that squeaked on tile. I did not look at the mirror again. I locked the house. I patted the maple trunk before I got into the Camry. The car started on the first turn, like it always does. I let the heater run for a minute and then backed out slowly. They chose Riverside Grill, a place with starched tablecloths and a view of the river that always seemed to cost more on the bill. I arrived 10 minutes early and waited in the lobby, hands in my jacket pockets, watching couples arrive in clean lines and bright teeth. Sarah waved when she saw me, a small, embarrassed wave, the way a daughter might greet a distant uncle, not her father. David came behind her, holding the door for a couple, but letting it slide when an older man approached. It told me everything I needed to know. He kissed the air near my cheek and called me sir, like a man trying on a new suit. We were seated near the window. The host pulled out Sarah's chair with a flourish. No one touched mine. The menus were heavy. David set his phone face up on the linen, a silent little screen that reflected the chandelier. He commented on the river lights. He said the steaks here were decent, but that the seafood tower was worth it. He asked the waiter about a Napa cab and nodded like he'd said something important. I asked for water. Just water. The words made him smile a thin smile. He ordered the seafood tower. He ordered a glass of wine that cost $20. He ordered an appetizer with a name I didn't recognize. When the waiter turned to me, I ordered the roast chicken. $12. I could feel David looking at me as if I had failed a test. He lifted his sleeve so the Rolex would show. It was shiny, with a face the color of champagne. He tapped it like a man taps the hood of a car. "Gift to myself," he said to Sarah, but loud enough for the table. $22,000, but you have to reward success. I told Sarah, once we get Dad into a place where he's comfortable, we'll have more room, travel, upstairs laundry, the works. The way he said Dad made it clear he didn't mean it. He meant the problem to be solved, the weight to be moved. I sipped my water and let it sit on my tongue. Cold, clean, honest. The seafood tower arrived like a monument. Ice, shells, lemon wedges. He made a show of cracking and dipping, licking his fingers, calling the waiter back for more sauce. Sarah didn't look at me. She folded her napkin into tiny squares. He started a little sermon about standards, about how people live small because they think small, about how Sarah had lived small for too long. He said she deserved the best. He listed Venetian hotels and cars with letters in their names. The waiter refilled my water. I said thank you, and the waiter smiled at me, not at David. I noticed that. Small things reveal truth. Halfway through the meal, I heard my name from behind me. It was Frank Turner, a neighbor from 30 years ago, a man who had borrowed my ladder more times than I could count. He slapped my shoulder with a laugh. "Tom, you still driving that old Camry of yours? I swear that engine will outlive us all." He chuckled and introduced his wife, who gave me a kind little nod. I smiled. I said it still ran fine, that I changed the oil myself. Before I could say more, David leaned in, loud enough for the tables around us to hear. "A Camry?" He tilted his glass. "That thing's probably worth what, $3,000? I pay more than that just to change tires on my BMW." He laughed, and the sound was hollow, like a spoon hitting a can. Frank's face closed like a door. His wife looked down. Sarah tried to smile and failed. I kept my eyes on the river. The lights looked like melted coins. That was the second little storm of the night, a quick front that told me the big one was still coming. I felt the first wave of anger crash through me, then pull back, leaving me standing on wet sand. I could have asked why a man would brag about rubber. I could have asked if he ever helped a neighbor move a couch or change a battery. I could have asked what he would do when the road got icy and the tires didn't grip, and you needed more than money to keep you upright. I said none of it. I chewed my chicken and let him talk. He kept going, about aging parents, about efficiency, about professional caretakers and what they could do that family just can't. He kept using the word facility like it was a hotel. He never said home. He never said father. He said my name exactly once. He used it like a comma. "Tom, you'll be happier," he said, and took another slow sip of wine. When the check came, he grabbed it like a trophy. He said he had it. He said it was nothing. He said something about investing in the future. He made sure I saw the platinum card. I reached for my wallet anyway and slid a 20 toward the server, a tip for the man who refilled my water without being asked, for the woman who cleared plates with the quiet grace of someone who knows how to carry other people's burdens. David saw the bill and smirked. "Keep it, Tom," he said. "You'll need it." He laughed at his own joke. He always laughed at his own jokes. We stood to leave. Sarah hugged me quickly, a ghost of the girl who used to fall asleep on my chest. David offered his hand like a politician and squeezed just a little too hard. His cologne followed me out into the cold air. The river breathed mist. I walked to the Camry and rested my hand on the roof. The metal was cool, solid, honest. I sat for a minute without starting the engine, watching my breath fog the windshield. "I see you, son," I said, though he could not hear me. "I see you clearly." On the drive home, the streets were quiet. Porch lights flicked on as people returned from their days. Dogs barked at nothing, then at something. My turn signal clicked, a metronome that let my thoughts arrange themselves. I replayed every word, every glance. I wasn't looking for insults. Those were obvious. I was looking for weakness. Pride is always a weakness. So is ignorance about where power really sits. Back in the living room, I laid the dinner receipt on the table beside the trust drafts Harris emailed for review. I read each line slowly. Trustee, successor, trustee, powers, revocation. The language looked cold, but I knew what it meant when you warmed it in your hands. It meant I could breathe. It meant the roof stayed mine until I said otherwise. Harris called at 9 to confirm the bank had placed the hold. He had the county filings ready for the morning. He suggested we also notify the brokerage to place a verbal password on the small stock account, just in case. He spoke calmly. I answered with care. When we hung up, I felt the house settle again, as if the foundation had been checked and found sound. At 10, the phone lit up with Sarah's name. I stared at it ring. I let it go to voicemail. The message came through seconds later. Her voice sounded tight, controlled. She said David wanted the best. She said I had embarrassed them with my clothes, with my water, with my $20 bill. She said appearances mattered. She said people judge. She said she didn't want to be judged. Then, softer, she said she wished Mom were here to talk some sense into me. I stood by the mantel and looked at Mary's picture for a long time. "You wouldn't like how he talks to waiters," I told her. "You wouldn't like what he thinks of old cars and old men." The house was quiet except for the clock. I was not alone. The next day I signed the trust documents in Harris's office. The pen felt heavy, important. I initialed where he pointed. He explained the filing order. He explained how the trust would own the house, but I would own the trust. He explained what could and could not be done without me. I left with copies in a large envelope and put them in a new safe deposit box. I drove home by the long route, past the school where Sarah learned to read, past the church where we sang off-key on Christmas Eve, past the small park where I taught both girls to ride bikes. The leaves were turning. The air was bright. Life went on. That afternoon, Sarah texted an address and a time for a tux fitting for me, as if it were a command. I replied that I had my suit. She wrote back a single word. "Fine." I could hear the ice in it. I sat on the porch steps and let the sun warm my face. "I miss you," I said to no one and to Mary and to the version of my daughter that still reached for my hand at crosswalks. A neighbor walked by with a small dog and waved. I waved back and stood because I refused to look like a man who cannot stand. Over the next 2 days, I did small, deliberate things. I labeled the boxes in the attic so no one could claim confusion. I made a list of accounts and passwords and put it in the safe deposit box with the trust. I changed the two-factor authentication to the landline in the kitchen instead of my cell, because David once asked to borrow my phone, and I do not forget moments like that. I printed bank alerts and filed them. I cooked stew and froze half. I slept. I woke. I moved through my house like a man measuring lumber before he cuts. Measure twice. Cut once. Live with your choices. Friday evening, I agreed to meet Sarah and David again, not because I wanted to, but because you sometimes need to look a problem in the eye before you put up the fence. They chose a trendy place this time. Edison bulbs, brick walls, loud music that makes conversation feel like work. I wore the same old jacket. The hostess glanced at me and pointed to the bar. I waited there until they waved me over. David was in rare form. He talked about guest lists and how our side would be impressive. He said a judge would be there, a real estate developer, a man who owned dealerships in 3 states. He said I'd be seated with the family, but he said the words the way people say, the kids' table. He reminded me loudly that a facility could take me the week after the wedding. He said he had already put down a deposit. He used the phrase, move-in package, as if I were a sofa. Sarah looked tired, the kind of tired you can't fix with sleep. I asked her gently if this was what she wanted. She said yes, but her eyes slid away. I paid my own check. He tried to take it from me, laughing, and I held it with a grip that made him finally let go. Small things matter. Outside, the evening was soft, the sky a wide bowl of blue. I walked to the Camry, and he followed to make another point I won't give the dignity of repeating. I opened my door and then stopped. I looked at him. I let the quiet sit between us until even he felt it. "You think I've lost," I said, calm as a lake at dawn. "But the game has just begun." He laughed, because that is what he always does when he is nervous. I got in the car and drove away, and this time I did not look in the mirror. On Saturday morning, Harris emailed a confirmation. The trust was recorded at the county. The notice was now in the public index. The savings hold remained. The brokerage flag was in place. He also sent a short note, not legal at all, just a line from a friend. Proud of you. I printed it and tucked it into the folder, because I have learned to keep small trophies. I spent the rest of the day in the garage. I tightened the hinge on the back door. I changed the oil in the Camry and checked the belts. I swept sawdust that wasn't there the way you sweep a church before Sunday. I opened the old toolbox my father left me, the one with his name scratched on the lid, and touched the cold steel of the wrenches as if they could answer questions. "What would you do?" I asked the empty air. The answer came in the rhythm of work. Straighten what is crooked. Strengthen what is weak. Leave the rest be. That evening, Sarah sent a simple text. "See you at the rehearsal dinner," I replied with one word. Yes. I sat in the living room and watched the late light pour across the floor like honey. I thought of the rehearsal dinner as a small stage before a larger one. David would perform. His parents would perform. I would sit where they put me and let them believe what they wanted to believe. The truth had a date on the calendar now. I could feel it, the way you can feel a storm when your knees ache. Before I went to bed, I stood in front of Mary's picture and spoke out loud. "They think I'm weak," I said. "They think I'm old and easy to move. They don't know the weight of this house. They don't know the weight of a promise." I rested my fingers on the frame, then on the envelope that held the trust copy. Paper, wood, skin, a stack of quiet strength. Sunday morning came with a clean sky. I walked the neighborhood before church and nodded to people who had known me since my hair was dark. On the way home, I drove by the Riverside Grill. The window where we had sat was empty, the white tablecloth glowing in the sun. I imagined the waiter who brought me water taking his break in the alley, lighting a cigarette he probably shouldn't smoke, thinking about the man who tipped him with a 20 like it mattered. Because it did. Respect is a currency. Some people have none. After lunch, I sat at the dining room table with a yellow legal pad and drew columns like a man planning a deck. What I own, what I owe, who I trust, who I don't. Under what I own, I wrote the parcel number, the address, and the words "Revocable Trust" in block letters. Under who I trust, I wrote 3 names. Harris, Ms. Jenkins. Frank Turner, because a man who returns a ladder on time is a man you can call when your back hurts and the snow needs shoveling. Under who I don't, I wrote 2 names and drew a box around them. It didn't feel good. It felt necessary. As the day faded, I packed the folder into the messenger bag and set it by the front door. I placed my suit, the one I had worn to weddings and funerals and to Mary's last Christmas service, on the bedroom chair. I polished my shoes. I ironed a shirt. I did not need a tux. I did not need to borrow anyone's idea of dignity. Mine was stitched into the seams of a suit that had seen real life. Before turning in, I stepped onto the porch. The maple leaves rustled like old paper. The neighborhood was quiet, a kind of quiet that makes you hear your own pulse. I closed my eyes and breathed. I could see the church. I could see the aisle. I could hear the clink of crystal at the reception and the brightness in voices that only money seems to buy. I could also see the moment when the mask would slip. Not mine, theirs. I had no mask left to wear. I smiled, not out of cruelty, but out of relief. The truth was heavy, but it was mine to lift. I went inside, locked the door, and stood still until the house seemed to breathe with me. I touched the safe in the bedroom one more time. I checked the windows. I checked the stove. Old habits, yes, but also a kind of prayer. When I finally lay down, I stared at the ceiling and spoke a sentence into the dark, a sentence that felt like a hinge moving, a door opening to a room with better light. They think I've lost. They think age means surrender. They think paper beats principle. Let 'em. Tomorrow I will put on my old suit and my steady shoes. Tomorrow I would walk into their perfect room and sit quietly while their pride built a tower out of ice. And then, when the moment came, I would let the sun in. They do not know what I hold. They do not know what I have already set in motion. They do not know that the thing they worship, the thing they count, the thing they brag about at tables with starched cloths and champagne flutes, has a new name on the deed. Mine. That knowledge sat beside my bed like a faithful dog. I slept. When I woke, the house was still. The day was waiting. And somewhere across town, so was the truth. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke to a clean blue sky and the quiet that settles on a house before a hard day. My suit hung ready on the closet door. I slid a legal envelope into the inside pocket and felt it against my ribs like a steady hand. Inside were copies of the trust that holds my house, the bank holds $300,000 in savings, and a short letter from Harris with today's date and time. The paper looks harmless. Tonight it would be anything but. I brewed coffee and stood at the kitchen window. The maple in the yard moved in small shifts of light. 40 years in this home, and that tree still finds sun. I rinsed the cup, straightened my tie, and paused by the family photos in the hall. There, I told Mary what I planned. I would walk our daughter down the aisle. I would keep my voice even. I would let foolish words pass like wind through a fence. And if the moment came, I would speak clearly, with facts, not anger. I touched the glass over her smile and left for the church. The church wore late flowers and a long white runner. In the lot, new cars glinted like coins. I parked the Camry by a curb and patted the dashboard. Inside, lilies climbed in tall vases. The ushers moved guests like pieces in a calm game. The organ rose and fell. Sarah met me near the doors, veil soft on her shoulders, eyes bright. She took my arm and pressed her cheek to my sleeve for a heartbeat. We walked. Faces turned. The minister asked who gave this woman, and I said I did. David stood in a tuxedo that fit like a promise made to a mirror. He kissed her. Applause rolled through the pews like a small storm that has somewhere else to go. The reception hall shone like a jewelry box. Chandeliers poured small suns. A gold frame sent me to table 12 near the edge of the room, between a distant cousin and a man who sells boats. The head table sat on a low stage. The band tuned up. A waiter poured wine at every place but mine and did not look surprised when I asked for water. I slid the envelope under my chair and folded my hands. I could feel the room measuring and arranging. That was fine. I had already measured and arranged what mattered. The room smelled of roses and candle wax and money spent to impress. I learned later the venue alone ran close to $30,000 for the night, the flowers over 20, the band another 10, and that did not count the open bar or the cake stacked like a white tower. It was a 6-figure evening. People spoke in low voices that carried confidence. Women wore dresses with names. Men wore watches that declared the hour and the owner at the same time. I took my chair and let the spectacle wash over me like a tide that arrives on schedule, whether anyone is watching or not. Dinner began with a careful salad and a soft roll. David took the microphone and paced like a showman. He introduced the groomsmen with jokes. He praised the planner and the florist and the baker of the 5-tier cake. He drew laughs without much effort. Then he turned toward my side of the room. He paused just long enough to make it sting. "And here he is, folks," he said, smiling wide, "the annoying beggar we all have to put up with." A few people laughed before they caught themselves. A fork rang against a plate. Heat climbed my neck, then cooled. I remembered the dinner at Riverside. The Rolex flashed like a badge, the small jokes about my $20 bill, the tired laugh I forced so my daughter would not have to choose in public. This felt worse. It was not a room of strangers. It was my child's wedding. Laughter that died in people's throats still leaves a bruise. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. The bank app showed an alert. Attempted online access blocked at 7:42 p.m. If this were you, confirm. If not, contact the branch. I confirmed it was not me and slid the phone away. The calm I felt was not joy. It was proof, arriving on time, quiet as a letter. The sun fell along the windows. A new murmur collected near the entrance. Eleanor and Richard Langford had arrived at last. They moved like people who have practiced being watched. Eleanor's gown held the light. Richard's tuxedo fit like a rule. They greeted Sarah and shook hands with the groomsmen. David lit up next to them, pointing at the room as if he were giving them a tour of his kingdom. Then he steered them toward me. He put a hand on my shoulder and leaned into the mic. "And this," he said, "is the same annoying beggar I told you about. He loves his water." It was uglier the second time. Richard gave me the kind of nod men exchange in elevators. Eleanor did not nod. She studied my face as if it were a signature on a page she had seen before. Her eyes narrowed, then widened. She took a half-step closer. "Excuse me," she said, low enough that only our table heard. "Haven't we met?" "I don't think so," I said. I would have remembered. She kept looking. Her hand rose to her throat and fell again. Then she said it. "My God, aren't you the man who bought our company last year?" Her voice was a half-whisper, half-bell. Sound drained from the room. The band stopped. Forks hung above plates. David froze with the mic near his mouth. Sarah stood partway, as if a string had tugged her up. I let 2 seconds pass. "Yes, Eleanor," I said. "I am," I spoke softly. The words traveled anyway. Faces turned. Richard made a small sound that might have been a cough. Last year my name was not on the bid. It was a holding company with a quiet address and a cleaner's patience. The wire landed on a Friday afternoon. $50 million even. The agreement carried a standard confidentiality clause and a few custom lines I wrote myself because I believe kindness is clearer on paper than in promises. I had met Eleanor twice in rooms where my representative spoke while I watched and listened and asked 2 questions at the end. She did not forget faces. Some people never do. David's smile cracked across his face like ice in a glass. "You can't be," he blurted. "You live in that tiny house. You drive that car. You drink water. That company sold for $50 million. He hit the number like it would save him. "I live in my home," I said. "I drive a car that starts. I drink water because it is good. And yes, your family accepted $50 million when I acquired your company." I lifted the envelope onto the table and laid it flat on the linen. "Copies?" I said. "Trust holding my house. County record. The bank holds $300,000 in savings. And a letter to you, David, from my attorney. It is being delivered at the door right now." He looked toward the entrance. The coordinator with an earpiece stood there with a small envelope in her hand. Richard raised his voice a notch, smooth as a man who believes in back rooms. "Mr. Stone, perhaps we can step aside and clear up this misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," I said. I kept my eyes on David. "Any attempt to sell my house without my written consent is void. Any attempt to move funds is blocked." Tonight at 7:42, someone tried to log in. It failed. The letter is a formal notice to cease from any attempt to encumber my property or press for guardianship without cause. The property is recorded as 212 Oak Lane, appraised most recently at $600,000, held by the Stone Family Trust, deed number 18-245713, recorded with the county last spring. The bank holds a reference account ending in 1742, $300,000 reserved for my care at home, not for any facility chosen by anyone else. The notice includes a log of calls and texts about selling the house and moving me, with dates and times. It puts those words in a file with a number that will be easy for a judge to find. If there is a next attempt, we will let a judge hear the recordings and read the messages. A murmur rolled to the back wall and returned to the front. The coordinator arrived and handed the envelope to David. He tore it open, scanned the first lines, then the signature. Color left his face. The microphone drooped to his side until it pointed at the floor. Glass clinked somewhere. The bandleader cleared his throat and then stayed quiet. Several guests had their phones out now, not to film, but to search. I watched the ripple of screens as people typed my name and the word sale. The articles were there, short and curious, about a mystery buyer and a quiet wire. David tried to raise the mic again, maybe for a toast, maybe for a joke to glue the moment back together. Nothing came out. The room did not want a toast. It wanted air. "You did this to embarrass me," David said at last, smaller without the mic. "You could have talked to me. You could have asked." "I did ask," I said. "I asked when I paid my own bill, and you laughed at my 20. I asked when you bragged about tires that cost more than my car. I asked when you called me a beggar at dinner, then again tonight. You answered each time. You just did not hear yourself." Sarah stood all the way now, hands white on her napkin. "Dad," she whispered, "is this true?" I nodded. "It's true. Harris and I protected the house and the savings. I left you your choices. I am keeping mine." Her eyes filled. She looked at David. He would not meet her gaze. Eleanor breathed in and found her center. "Apologize," she told her son, voice clear, not loud. "To this man, to your wife, then step back." Richard stared at the letter. He knew paper. He knew what happened when paper carried weight. David tried a laugh, then a smile, then the oldest trick. He went down on one knee, then both, hands together like prayer. "Sir," he said, loud enough for nearby tables, "I was testing you. I had to be sure you weren't after Sarah's money. It was a bad joke. Please forgive me." The lie was thin. A couple of guests made helpless sounds that were almost laughs. Someone said, "Oh boy," the way people do when they see a car slide on ice. "Stand up," I said. "Begging does not suit you." He rose too fast, hit his knee on the table, and a champagne flute tipped, fell, and shattered in a quick, bright ring. He flinched at the sound. He looked at me for rescue and found none. He looked to his parents. Their faces had gone still. I slid the envelope back into my pocket. "I came to give my daughter away with love," I told the table and the tables near us. "I did not come to be measured like a coat on a hook. The paper protects my roof and my savings. The rest is between you and your mirrors." I turned to Sarah so she would hear it straight. "You are an adult. You can choose your life. My door is open to you, but I will not sit where I am not respected." Her hand lifted and fell. A tear hung and did not drop. I wanted to wipe it away the way I did when she was small. I did not. The room held its breath. The band stood like statues. I walked toward the doors. Shoes on tile made a polite sound. The coordinator stepped aside. The courier who had brought the letter nodded at me. Task complete. In the lobby, the air was cooler. Outside, the night held the first edge of fall. Behind the doors, I could hear voices rise and tangle, a sound like wind in a stand of thin trees. I did not slow. A young usher watched me pass with eyes too wide. He will tell this story someday, and he will get some details wrong, and that will be fine. Stories do that. The valet reached for my ticket, and I shook my head. "I have it," I said. I preferred the quiet of my own hands. The Camry waited where I left it, honest as ever. I rested my palm on the roof for a second, and then got in. Driving away, I watched the hall shrink in the mirror until the glow of chandeliers was a soft coin. Streets were empty. Porch lights made small pools along the block. At a red light, I said it out loud in the quiet car. "They thought I was weak," I said. "Now they see the price of that mistake." The light changed. I went home. The house greeted me with the tick of the mantel clock and the soft creak I could find with my eyes closed. I hung the jacket on a chair and set the envelope on the table. I poured water and drank it slowly. The quiet felt full, not hollow. I sat on the couch we bought the year the furnace died. I can still feel the draft from that winter when we chose blankets over debt. Decisions mark a life more than luck. The house knew us, and we knew it. I spread the papers and ran a finger along each line like a blind man reading a map he drew himself. My hands stopped shaking. In their place came a deep, ordinary tiredness, the kind you feel after you stack wood until you see straight. I unfolded Harris's letter and read it again. It was not poetry, but it sang. Protected assets. Trustee consent required. Any attempt to encumber the property without the trustee's written consent shall be considered void. The words rang like a small bell that keeps time when storms make clocks slow. I lifted Mary's picture from the mantel. "It is done," I told her. Not all of it, but the part that had to be done tonight. I told her about the bank alert at 7:42. I told her about the coordinator at the door and how the room went quiet when Eleanor spoke. I told her Sarah's eyes had looked like hers the day we brought our first child home, wide and unsure and tender. I set the picture back and touched the wood. "Thank you," I said, because it felt right to say. I sat and made a small list in pencil on the back of an old receipt. Call Harris in the morning. Send copies to the safe deposit box. Change the garage code. Buy a porch bulb. Ordinary tasks returned like steady friends. Relief followed them. I was not triumphant. I did not want a victory lap. I felt balanced again, like a beam sistered to carry weight. The phone buzzed once, then again. I did not pick up. If they were apologies, they could wait until morning. If they were threats, they could wait forever. I rinsed the glass, locked the door, and checked the windows. Old habits, still useful. In the bedroom, I laid the jacket across a chair and put the envelope on the dresser where the sun would find it. I wrote one sentence on a sticky note and pressed it to the envelope. Live freely. Back in the hall, I paused by the photos. Years looked back from the frames. The girls in swimsuits at the lake. Mary laughed behind too many candles. Sarah, in a cap and gown, is beaming. Life is not a straight line. It bends, it dips, it asks more of your legs than you plan to give. I traced a frame and went to the porch. The night was cool, a moth battered the light and finally settled. Down the block, a dog barked twice and stopped. Somewhere, a train gave a low horn and it sounded like a long line being drawn under the day. I thought of David's voice and of the look on Eleanor's face when the man met the math and of Richard's hand tightening on a chair he did not own. I thought of Sarah's tear that did not fall. Pain and love share a border. Tonight I stood on it and I did not step off. I sat on the step and let the day run through again, from lilies to glass to the car that always starts. I closed my eyes and saw Eleanor's recognition, the shock, then certainty. People think money announces itself with noise. Sometimes money is quiet. Sometimes it sits at table 12 and drinks water and waits for the right wind. I went back inside and turned off the lights. The house breathed. I lay down and let the weight drop from my shoulders to the ground under the house where it belongs. What comes next will not be simple. There will be fallout. There will be calls. There may be lawyers at long tables with yellow pads. There may be silence. I can live with either. The important thing is done. The roof is mine. The savings are safe. And my voice is my own again. Before sleep, I said one more line into the dark. Justice is not late, I said. It arrives on time. The words did not swell my chest. They made space in it. Tomorrow I would meet Harris at 9, carry the originals in a plain folder, and sign one more directive that leaves no daylight for schemes. We would talk about the deed, the account, and a clause that sends a slice of the estate to a scholarship in Mary's name. There would be choices. I would make it clear. I closed my eyes. I slept, feeling overlooked, treated with contempt. It's hard, isn't it? If you believe everyone deserves to be recognized and treated fairly, comment the keyword, justice. Now let's see what they do to change that. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The night after the wedding was long. I hardly slept. The chandelier light, the stunned faces, the letter in David's hands, they all replayed in my mind like a reel that refused to stop. But instead of the anger that had churned in me for weeks, what I felt was a quiet strength. The moment had already passed. I had spoken my truth, and the documents had spoken louder. They could no longer twist my silence into weakness. In the morning, I called Harris, my lawyer and my friend of 30 years. His voice carried the calm that comes from knowing how to steady a ship in rough waters. We met at his office before noon. The walls there were lined with law books that smelled faintly of paper and dust, a smell I had grown to associate with safety. Harris had already filed confirmations of the property trust and the bank hold. My home and savings were locked down tighter than ever. But I wanted one more step, something that would turn the betrayal into protection, not just for myself, but for Sarah. I asked Harris to draft papers transferring $200,000 into a charitable trust, earmarked for scholarships in Mary's name. It was a way of honoring her, and also a way of shielding part of the estate from any greedy hands. The papers specified that Sarah would be one of the trustees. Not David. Never David. Harris looked at me over his glasses, then nodded. This will give her something real, something David can't touch, and it honors Mary. I felt the first true exhale leave my chest in weeks. Within days, the trust was filed, notarized, and secure. It wasn't just paper anymore, it was a wall, a living wall that kept Sarah's future safe from the man she had chosen. For the first time, I could see a path forward, not free from pain, but free from fear. The Langfords did not fare so well. Within a week, whispers spread through their circle. The revelation at the wedding had been too public, too dramatic. Eleanor tried to keep her chin high, but she couldn't undo what the guests had seen. Richard found that doors closed quickly, phone calls went unanswered, and business partners hesitated before shaking his hand. And David could not escape the stain. He had mocked me as a beggar, only to discover the beggar held the deed to his family's empire. In those upper circles, humiliation is a debt that never gets forgiven. People laughed behind his back. Invitations dried up. Control of the company, of course, was mine. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't make speeches or show up at board meetings in triumph. I simply let the structure do what it was meant to do. I provided steady leadership, ensured employees kept their jobs, and made quiet decisions that brought stability. The Langfords were still visible on the masthead, but their voices carried less weight now. David tried to insert himself into the business, but no one listened. He had been exposed for what he was, a loud man with shallow pockets and no discipline. In the quiet of my own kitchen, I sometimes allowed myself a smile at the thought. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just removes the noise until all you hear is the truth. I knew, however, that I didn't want to spend the rest of my days locked in a house full of painful memories. My old home was worth about $650,000 now, and though every wall carried Mary's laughter and the echoes of my children's childhoods, it had become too heavy for me. So I sold it. Harris helped with the paperwork, and within a week, the sale was final. I bought a smaller condo for $200,000 just across from a quiet park. It had 2 bedrooms, one for me and one for the memories I couldn't let go of. The first morning I woke there, the light streamed through new curtains, soft and golden. I brewed coffee and sat by the window. Outside, people walked their dogs, couples strolled with strollers, and children rode bikes with training wheels. The world felt fresh again, unburdened by the weight of betrayal. I raised my mug and whispered, "Mary, we did it. We're free." For the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted. I felt light. Every day after that settled into a rhythm I didn't know I had missed. I'd sip coffee while watching the park wake up. I'd read the paper slowly, circling words I wanted to remember. Sometimes I'd take a walk, greeting neighbors I hadn't yet learned by name. There was peace in anonymity. No one looked at me as a man to be measured by what car he drove or what watch he wore. I was just another man on the path, breathing the morning air. Of course, David's downfall didn't end with whispers. Friends distanced themselves. His own parents, embarrassed beyond repair, began to keep him out of their conversations. The humiliation clung to him like a shadow that never leaves. He sold his BMW, downgraded to a cheaper car, and even then, people joked about the price of his tires. The same arrogance that once made him loud now made him alone. Sarah, I heard, wept often. She had chosen love, but love had turned into ridicule. It hurt me to know she suffered, but I also knew that pain was the natural child of betrayal. I couldn't save her from the choices she made. What I could do was protect myself, and through the scholarship trust, protect her name from being swallowed by his greed. Weeks later, Sarah called. Her voice was shaky, not the confident tone she used to wear when David was near. "Dad," she said, "I'm sorry. I never should have let things go this far. Can we talk?" I closed my eyes and pressed the phone to my ear. My heart ached because I still loved her. She was still my daughter, but love cannot erase boundaries. "I'll always love you, Sarah," I said quietly. "But I won't let anyone insult me again. Not David, not anyone. My door will always be open if you come with respect, but not if you come to use me." There was silence on the other end, broken only by a soft sob. Then she whispered, "I understand." The call ended. I sat with the ache, but also with the relief of knowing I had spoken truth without cruelty. The months passed gently. I found new joy in smaller things. I joined a community group that organized food drives and charity dinners. We laughed over casseroles and worked side by side packing boxes. No one there cared about bank accounts or property deeds. They cared about showing up. I felt closer to them in those hours than I had felt to my own family in years. It reminded me that blood is not the only bond that matters. Respect, kindness, and honesty make a family too. On Sundays, I'd walk to the park and sit on a bench near the fountain. I'd watch children toss bread to ducks and couples share coffee from paper cups. Sometimes I'd bring a notebook and write thoughts, lines I might want to share someday, or just fragments of memory. One day I wrote, "Dignity is the last inheritance we owe ourselves." I underlined it twice. The contrast between my peace and David's decline grew sharper. Word reached me through mutual acquaintances that he and Sarah had moved into a rented apartment. No more lavish dinners, no more Rolex on his wrist. The watch had been pawned, they said, and the money didn't last long. Sarah picked up part-time work while David bounced between failed ventures, still bragging about opportunities that never came. Their fall was slow, but it was steady, and it was deserved. For me, peace did not come all at once, but it came. The condo became home. The park became comfortable. The scholarship fund awarded its first grant, a check to a young woman studying nursing. Her thank you letter brought tears to my eyes. "Because of your support, I can chase my dream," she wrote. I thought of Mary, who had always wanted to be a nurse, and I whispered again, "We did it." In quiet moments, I reflected on the lessons carved into me by pain. Parents must set boundaries, or love can be twisted into weakness. Children must carry gratitude, not entitlement, or they will destroy the very foundation that raised them. And in this modern world, where appearances shine brighter than character, the truth remains that dignity and honesty are worth more than gold. Sarah tried again, weeks later, to reach out. This time I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was gentler, filled with regret, but I could hear David's shadow in the background. I knew better. I wouldn't let her pain become my prison. I listened, but I didn't respond. I loved her, but I loved my self-respect more. Each evening I'd sit by the window and let the quiet settle. I'd breathe in the smell of coffee or tea, hear the faint laughter from the park below, and feel the weight of betrayal finally lift. One night I said it aloud, to myself, to Mary, to the empty room. I don't need them anymore. I have myself. The words sounded strange at first, then strong, then true. And so the chapter of betrayal closed, not with fireworks, but with a steady flame that kept burning, lighting my way forward. The pain had been real, the humiliation deep, but so was the justice. And justice, I realized, doesn't just punish the guilty. It sets the innocent free. Now I look ahead. Next week, I'll attend my first full meeting with the charity group, not just as a volunteer, but as a board member. They asked me because they saw what I could give. Not money, but time, steadiness, and experience. That's what matters now. Not Rolexes, not lavish weddings, not six-figure receptions, just people living with dignity, giving what they can. I don't know if Sarah will ever truly come back, but I know this. I'll be okay either way because I've chosen peace. I've chosen self-respect. And I've chosen to live the rest of my life not in the shadow of betrayal, but in the light of freedom. The condo has become my sanctuary. It isn't grand, but it doesn't need to be. The walls are painted a warm cream. The kitchen is small but tidy, and from the balcony I can see the park stretching wide with trees that change colors with the seasons. Each morning I wake to the sound of birds instead of the echoes of old arguments. I make a simple breakfast, usually oatmeal and coffee, and then I sit by the window and watch the neighborhood wake up. People walk their dogs, children ride bikes, and I feel the rhythm of life beating steady again. It's a rhythm that is mine, not controlled by anyone else. I joined a local charity group, the same one Harris introduced me 2 months ago. At first, I was nervous, unsure if I still belonged in the busy world of plans and projects. But they welcomed me with open arms. We organized a fundraiser and raised $50,000 for children in need. 50,000. The number made me smile, not because of its size, but because it reminded me that money, when put to the right purpose, heals instead of wounds. At the dinner we hosted, I looked around the tables, saw families laughing, volunteers clinking glasses, and I felt something inside me loosen. For so long, I had associated gatherings with betrayal. Now I associate them with hope. Every night when I return home, I take a slow walk around the park before climbing the stairs to my condo. I watch the lamps flicker on as dusk settles, the golden light scattering across the leaves. Sometimes neighbors nod and greet me. They don't know my story. They don't know about David's sneers or Sarah's silence. They only know me as the older man who helps with the food drives, who brings coffee cake to meetings, who smiles easily. And in that anonymity, I have found freedom. I remind myself often, I don't need their apology. I don't need their approval. I said it aloud once, looking at Mary's picture on my desk. I don't need an apology. I have myself, and I have this life. The words rang through the room like a bell. It was as if the walls themselves sighed with me. For years, I carried the weight of waiting for recognition, for gratitude, for someone to admit I was worth more than they said. But I realize now the recognition I needed had to come from me. Sarah and David's fate has unfolded as many predicted. They moved into a small rented apartment on the edge of town. No more dinner parties, no more expensive cars. The watch David once bragged about is long gone, sold for a fraction of its worth. Sarah tried to pick up part-time work, but even then she carried the stigma of that wedding night. In their world, humiliation spreads like wildfire, and reputations rarely recover. I heard from Harris that David tried to call him, tried to find a way to patch things over. He even left a message on my phone once. I didn't answer. My silence was my answer. The man who mocked me as a beggar would never get another piece of my time. I still love Sarah. Love doesn't vanish, not even in betrayal. But I love her from a distance now, a distance that protects me, a distance that keeps my dignity intact. I whispered once to Mary's picture, I will always love our daughter, but I will never again let her hurt me. That balance, love without surrender, has given me more peace than forgiveness ever could. One afternoon, while I was sorting through mail, I came across a letter with handwriting I hadn't seen in years. It was from Thomas, an old friend from church days. Inside was a short note. We're starting a new project to bring meals to veterans who live alone. We thought of you. Would you like to join us? I sat back in my chair and laughed softly. Life, it seemed, wasn't finished opening doors. That simple invitation felt like proof that even when family ties fray, other bonds form. And sometimes those bonds are stronger. I folded the letter carefully, placed it on the desk, and whispered, Yes, Mary, another door has opened. The lessons I carry now are not abstract. They are carved into me by experience. For parents, I say this: love your children deeply, but never let that love erase your boundaries. A child raised without boundaries may mistake generosity for weakness. Protect your dignity, because one day it may be all that shields you. For children, I say, gratitude is not optional. It is the thread that ties you back to the ones who carried you when you couldn't walk on your own. If you cut that thread, you may find yourself lost in a world that does not care. And for all of us, in this modern world, remember that character outlasts wealth. Money can vanish overnight, but integrity is the one inheritance that can never be stolen. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I sit with Mary's old locket in my hand. Inside is a picture of her on our wedding day, smiling as if she already knew the battles we would face together. I whisper, "We made mistakes, but we never gave up our dignity. That's the legacy." I place the locket back in its box, and I feel her presence in the room, not as a ghost of grief, but as a reminder of strength. I no longer wait for phone calls from Sarah. I no longer check messages, hoping David will vanish from her life. That's not my battle to fight anymore. My battle was to reclaim myself, to stand tall after being called less than nothing, and to prove that betrayal does not have the last word. I have won that battle, and in winning it, I have stepped into a life that feels both smaller and larger, smaller in things, larger in meaning. One last time, I'll tell you what I've learned. Family is not just blood. Family is respect. Family is care. And family is anyone who looks at you and says, "I see you and you matter." Character is the one treasure no one can steal. And dignity is the one gift you must never give away. Tonight, as the sun set, I walked the path under the tall oaks in the park. The leaves were lit with golden light, and a breeze carried the scent of autumn. I pulled my jacket close and let the quiet wrap around me. I thought I had finally found where I belonged. My steps were slow, steady, unhurried. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking toward a battle or away from shame. I was simply walking, free. And that is how my story closes, not with bitterness, not with anger, but with peace. Betrayal tried to define me, but I chose to define myself. I chose truth, I chose dignity, and I chose to live the rest of my days in the sunlight of self-respect. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.